Well, welcome everyone to our next series, our AABHE Online Education and Engagement Series. Our town hall for today is titled Embracing a New Era in Higher Education. So let me be the first to formally welcome you. My name is Shewanee Howard-Baptiste. I serve as an associate professor at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga in the Department of Health and Human Performance, and also serve as the interim program director for the Masters in Public Health. I have the pleasure of moderating today's session, and we have two phenomenal session panelists, Dr. Joseph Silver and Dr. Dereck Rovaris. Dr. Rovaris will be joining us shortly, and so we have Dr. Silver with us to go ahead and get started. We first want to go over a couple of house rules and etiquette. So if you could, upon entering our session, please keep your mics muted during the presentation. Please ask all your questions in the chat. We have a great team here today helping us facilitate, so they'll be sure to get all of your questions to us. And remember that the golden rule always rules. So hopefully this is not your first time here. And if it is your first time, we'd like to be the first to welcome you and then welcome our other folks and family back. Dr. Dereck Rovaris is the president of the American Association of Blacks in Higher Education. And if you're not familiar with AABHE, I am happy and excited to tell you all the wonderful opportunities that AABHE has afforded me personally and professionally. We offer our Leadership and Mentoring Institute, which we call affectionately LMI, that's offered typically each summer, that provides professional development and training for young professionals, early career starters, junior faculty, and administrators. So if you're looking for, to me, the best professional development that I've ever had in almost 20 years in higher education was LMI class of 2018. We also offer our annual conference, which is coming up in just a couple of weeks. So March 14th through the 16th is our AABHE annual virtual conference. You can go to our website and get all the information that you need. We have dozens of hosts and presenters and awards that we're going to share with you at that time. So if you haven't registered, please go ahead and register for that conference. It's an online conference, and I guarantee you will not be disappointed. We also offer a career center. We have conference proceedings. We're working on journal publications. So there's a number of opportunities for our Black professionals in higher education. And we strive and continue to strive to be the premier space for Blacks in higher education. So today we are talking about embracing a new era in higher education. And so at this time, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can actually get into our conversation. So welcome everyone. So the first thing I want to do is start with Dr. Silver. So Dr. Silver, tell us a little bit about your background, your family, and kind of your professional life.
Well, thank you. Thank you so very much. I'm Joseph Silver. I am the son of Augusta and Joel Silver. I'm a number 6 or 7 kids and was born in Goldsboro, North Carolina. And early on, my father and mother instilled in us the expectation that we all were going to go to college somewhere. We didn't know where, but somewhere. Mm-hmm. And each of us had that opportunity. And I'm delighted that early on, I did my baccalaureate work in North Carolina, St. Augustine's College, my master's and PhD at Atlanta University in Atlanta, Georgia, and did a postdoc over at Stanford and Oxford over in England. And most of my career, I knew early on I was going to be in higher education. So I started my career at Kennesaw State as a political science professor teaching international politics and foreign policy, moved up the chain there to work in the president's office, and eventually moved over to the Georgia Board of Regents as the assistant vice chancellor of the University System of Georgia, where we ran the 34 colleges and universities at the time. Now I think it's reduced down to about maybe a little less than 30. My latter years in the Georgia system was spent at Savannah State University. I was provost and vice president for academic affairs at Savannah State University, where I retired from the system. That was my goal, to retire at an early age at 52, and I did that, but I didn't stay still. I ended up going to SACS, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, as the vice president for the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, where I had the wonderful opportunity to work with and for Dr. Bell Willen, and stayed there until my alma mater called, and I ended up being the provost at Clark Atlanta University, which was a great experience. And from there, I went to Alabama State for a very, very short time as president of that university, and then opened up my own business full-time. Had the business for many years as a part-time kind of operation, but about 10 years ago, I opened the business up full-time, and it's been a joy because it gives me an opportunity to exercise my purpose and my passion. Mm. My purpose has always been to make a difference in higher education, and my passion has always been young people in HBCU. So it has worked out. And most of my free time, I'm putting that in quotation marks, I'm volunteering with either AABHE or the museum project that we got going on in Ghana. That's something that we can talk about at a later time. But thank you for that question.
Thank you, Dr. Silver. I think that's a good segue. I would love to hear more about the international work that you do with AABHE and the work that you've done in Ghana.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, as many of you know, I used to be the chairman of the Black Caucus, which is the forerunner to AABHE. I wanted to stay involved, but out of the way, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I was appointed to direct the Leadership and Mentoring Institute first, which we created during my days at Savannah State, and then segued into the director of the International Professional Development Program for AABHE. And what that is every 2 years, we go to some part of Africa or the diaspora to create the linkages between the motherland and higher education here in the United States. Last year, before the pandemic started, we were supposed to be in Ethiopia and Dubai. We put that on hold until 2022. And so anybody who's on the call and have an interest, just let us know. But we've been to China, we've been to Australia, we've been to Brazil, we've been to all parts of Africa. And each time it is a learning experience. But also because of my interest in international politics and foreign policy, I've been going back and forth to Africa for over 30 years. And as such, I've been tapped by the Asantehene, who is the king of the Ashanti Nation, to do a project with him, looking at how do we influence technical education in Ghana. Also with Mr. Kojo Yanka at the African University of Communications and Business, where I began to serve on their board, and now I'm chairman of the governing council there. Out of that relationship grew this vision that he had for uniting Africans everywhere. And so we're in the midst of developing the Pan-African Heritage World Museum in Ghana, West Africa. And at the first meeting of that organization, they elected me as chairman of the international board. And that's just like a full-time job, but it's very invigorating. Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I can imagine, Dr. Silver, that you get called on often for a number of projects and opportunities and initiative because of just your skills and expertise. All of us start somewhere. So I love that you talked about the international connection and how we can bring the diaspora here back to the States. Tell us a little bit about who has influenced you. I know that we all have our own personal and professional mentors during, the course of our career trajectory. Who's been influential in your life?
It's kind of interesting because I hear that question a lot given to young people, and they say, well, who's your role model? Who's influenced you? And people go all the way around the world talking about this person, that person. I didn't have any problem with that. All I had to do was go to the next room where my mother and father were, go next door to where my grandmother was, or to look at my sisters and brothers. Each of my sisters and brothers, I'm number 6 or 7. There's 1 behind me and 5 above me. And each of them is such an awesome group of individuals. And so I can remember early on, as many of you know, I do a lot of public speaking around the world now. But where I got the fire was listening to my dad recite poetry,
Mm.
listen to my sister Gloria and my sister Esther in the oratory contest in high school. And I just said, I want to do that one day. But my parents were awesome. They were in the middle of this pandemic, we would call them blue collar workers.
Mm.
But my dad probably was the smartest person I've ever met anywhere. And he had a high school education and then went on to a little technical program to learn how to build TVs and electronics. But his grasp of economics and finance and politics just really, really inspired me. And then I had a grandmother. I think my disposition came from my mother and my father and my grandmother, my father's mother. And I had the luxury of having my mother's parents living 8 blocks from us. I didn't know my grandmother because she died before I was born, but I spent a lot of time with my grandfather King, and I spent a lot of time with my grandmother Silver Obelia. And she had a great influence in terms of, I think, the kind spirit that I think I have.
Mm-hmm.
I think I got that from her. And then as we progressed, there were teachers in elementary school. My favorite was Miss Bennett, my 5th grade teacher, and Mr. Gainey, my 7th grade teacher. I remember my parent-teacher conference with Mr. Gainey, and he told my dad that you need to keep an eye on that young man. He's going to go places. And of course, I had no idea that Goldsboro would launch me to travel the entire world. I have traveled every continent with the exception of Antarctica. And I said I didn't really have a reason to go to Antarctica, but now, believe it or not, during this pandemic, it's on my bucket list. So I can say I've visited all 7. But those are the influences, I think. And then early on in my professional career, Dr. Mac Jones, Dr. Larry Moss, Dr. William Boone, folk who trained me in my graduate program, awesome intellectual giants. And I learned so much from them. But the giving and the desire to do your best, the desire to pursue projects that are going to have a greater impact on the community, that's all family. That came from my family.
Yeah, as my grandmother would say, you came from good stock.
Yes. There's at the God, there's no bigger influence in my life than my family. And now that I have grandchildren, it is awesome. You know, I find myself wanting to end my day just to have a conversation with my grandchildren. And even before I came onto this panel, I spoke to them. So it's a good feeling. And then I've been blessed. Many of you know Ms. Roz, and she's been a great influence. She's been a stabilizer in my life. We've only been married a short time, only 44 years. And so I say a short time because my mom and dad, before they passed, were married 69 years. And so 44 is just still trying to climb. But Roz is a matter-of-fact person, and she grounds me in so many ways. And she protects me from myself. And that's hard to do because I think I can go at 100 miles an hour every day at every hour. And at some point she pulls my chain and says, enough is enough, you know? So I really appreciate that. And I know that she loves me with all of my faults and unconditionally. So I'm blessed from the family perspective. Thank you.
I love it, Dr. Silver, that you're describing your village. So your partner, your wife, your grandchildren, your children, you know, our teachers, our educators, our mentors really comprise our village that help launch us to the next level so that we can give it back to the next generation. So thank you for that foundation. If we can, I would love to really just kind of start thinking about your book and your research and kind of what brought us to today. The timing of your new book titled Pandemic, Public Health, Race and Class, the American Challenge is more than appropriate for this particular time. Tell us kind of the why of your writing such a timely piece. And as someone who is in public health, I'm really fascinated by your work.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. It wasn't anything that I woke up at the beginning of the year and said, I'm going to trace this pandemic and write about it. That was not the case at all. two things happened. One, I decided to go back to my discipline conference, which is the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. I had the distinction of serving as president of the organization and re-elected to a second term. But they were honoring my major professor in March of 2020, Dr. Mac Jones. And so I said, I'm going to attend the conference. And then when I got to the conference, we were told that he would not come because his family did not want him to come because this was on the front end of the virus. And so they brought him in electronically, and he was such an inspiration. So then I'm sitting in the back of the room trying to be incognito, looking at all these budding young political scientists and some political scientists that I've known over the years, and panels were going on, and all of a sudden the executive director came and said, "We got a problem." And I told her, I said, "We got a problem?" I said, "I'm perfectly at peace and I don't know any problem in the world that I have." But she said, "Well, the keynote speaker for the night's banquet is not going to be able to attend. His wife had emergency surgery today. And given the impact of this virus, he does not want to come here and then take something back. So therefore, we want you to stand in." And I said, "I don't think so." And it's kind of interesting because I was doing, like I'm always doing two things at one time. I was going to attend this conference, then run over to the 100 Black Men National Board meeting where I was making a presentation, developing their strategic plan, and I had to make that presentation. So now this is 5 hours before the banquet. So I tried to talk her off the ledge and say, "Well, why don't we just have roundtable discussions?" And she said, "No, we advertise as a speaker, and so therefore that's what we need to do." So she said, "Why don't you talk about yourself and tell them how you became a political scientist?" And I said, "Oh, that's not going to happen." So I said, "Well, I tell you what I do. I will agree to speak, but I don't know what I'm going to talk on yet." I said, "I will show up at 6:30 and I'll be ready." And so now I had 5 hours, and then I went over and did my presentation for 2 hours at the 100 Black Men. So now I'm down to 3 hours. And then I started thinking, the virus took the keynote speaker out. The virus did not allow my professor to come to the conference. And so I said, let me think about how I can put something together about what I think will happen in this midst of this pandemic. And this political science group is a tough crowd. I mean, they by nature are critical. And so here I am coming relatively unprepared because I just got to know this 5 hours ago and I had 2 hours to put the presentation together. And so I decided I would give them what I thought would be my predictions as to the readiness to address the virus and then to pull it all together. Well, I did that and ended up really challenging them in a great way and saying, well, not only that, I think y'all should write about this. It's not enough to talk about it, you got to be about it. And they gave me a standing ovation. And then I thought about it on the way home. I said, you know, these folks, I'm telling them to write about it. Maybe I might need to do something. But in the midst of all this, as you recall, we started our series for AABHE.
We did.
And it started with the impact of the virus on higher education. And I delivered that presentation for the body. And I enjoyed kind of doing the research and putting it together. Then we followed up with a presentation with Dr. Willen on the impact of the virus and accreditation. Then we pulled together a group of my professional friends to do a panel on the finance and the impact on. So I started thinking about all this time that I've been spending trying to put this together. And I said, what I want to do is put together a book that is a political commentary. It wasn't supposed to be a scholarly piece and all. It was a political commentary that was grounded in my experience and what my lens of the world projected. The sociologist who talked about the picture in your head theory. What picture do you have in your head about this virus? That's what I wanted to write about. And I wanted to write about it because I was seeing so much disinformation going on, including that it didn't exist, that it was a hoax. When I saw people that I knew infected with the virus and dying from the virus, and the platform that feeds me every day, which is higher education, I saw how it was being disrupted. So I took time to pull it together.
And with that, in such a short amount of time, how did you even have time to write a book and pull? I know you've already described how many directions you're pulled in here, in Georgia, in Africa. How did you make time? How did Roz allow you to figure out to have the time to write this book?
So what I had to do is, like I've always done, is balance different aspects of my being. And so as Roz has told me all the time, even as early as this week, she said, you take care of everybody. You take care of me, you take care of your family, you take care of the church, you take care of your business, but you're not getting enough sleep. You're not taking care of yourself that much. So the bottom line is I made a commitment that every night at 9 o'clock, I would do something on this project. And you know this because you led the boot camp about carving out time to write. So my time was 9 o'clock, starting at 9 or 10 at night, and I would work to maybe 2 in the morning. I'd get me 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and I get up and start doing my business. And I did that for 3 months. I started, it was February, it was March, April, May, and then June, I kind of pulled it together on the final format, had some people to read it, and the end of June, it was at the publisher. But I just spent from 9 to 2 every night and into the morning writing, and then I would get up, take a shower, and start my business
Do it
day.
all over again.
Yeah, yeah.
So what is the central theme in your book? We have the title, Pandemic, Public Health, Race, and Class, the American Challenge. What would you say is the central theme of this text?
Yeah. Well, the bottom line is I was watching very intently as to the spin that was being put on the virus. First of all, saying it did not even exist. So we had a person in the White House that denied it exists. He got on public TV to say it was a hoax. In the meantime, I'm seeing all these people dying. And I'm looking at it from a political frame where he was using this hoax concept in order to play to his base. And when we began to look at that, I'm saying, well, if I look at this from a political scientist standpoint, leadership is missing. So a central theme in the book is leadership or lack thereof. And then looking at leadership and looking at the context of the American experience within context of race and class. And so one of the things that I talk about is starting from behind, leadership, the American challenge, starting from behind. And what I'm saying is because we had a leader, well, not even a leader, we had a person in the White House who denounced the virus, its existence. If we would have had someone to say, this is real and here's our plan of action, I don't think we would be where we are today in terms of the magnitude of this destruction. And so then I began to look at it in terms of race and class, because a lot of the frontline workers look like you and me. So the essential workers, and in my mind, I'm thinking, gee whiz, if my mom and dad were living today, they would be an essential worker. How does that make me feel? So the virus did not create the rift between race and class. What it did is expose it in a greater way. The same thing with the digital divide. The virus did not create the digital divide, but what it did do is make it on the front line, if you will, because it's sad to say that since we have been in this virtual space, there are some young people, some children who are being left behind because they don't have access to computers or they don't have access to the bandwidth. So I wanted to begin to look at it from leadership perspective, from race and class, and then looking at it from a sector standpoint. And what I mean by a sector standpoint is that this virus does not discriminate.
Right.
Every sector of the American economy and the world economy has been impacted by this virus. And the international supply chain has been interrupted in a big way. And just for an example, I thought I had left Savannah for good. You know, I live in Atlanta. I've been living in Atlanta and Savannah for 29 years. Thought I was finished with Savannah, but the boss lady said we were not. So we're back in Savannah and we had to buy furniture. And our furniture has been sitting on the coast of Florida for 3 months now. And I'm in Savannah as we speak because I was told that on Thursday it's finally going to be delivered. But it's been on the coast not being able to be delivered because of the virus. They put the whole ships in quarantine and would not even allow them into the United States. So this virus is real. And so when we look at it from a race and class perspective, it illuminates even greater because poor people are being forced to go to work, be exposed. You think about the nursing home, the high incidences there. You think about public safety. It's just phenomenal in terms of how this is impacting us on a race and class basis. Even the rollout of the vaccine is still based on race and class if you look at it from that perspective. But the other thing that I have is that throughout the book is that we should have learned from past experiences, and we didn't. And we should understand that leadership matters, and we didn't. And so I try to address this in my own way within the context of the book, yeah.
And Dr. Silver, this made me think of just the intersection of race and class, gender and age, ability level, leadership, transportation, all the things that we talk about in public health. What do you think makes this pandemic that we're currently still facing different than other pandemics and national health crises that we've seen in the past?
That's a great question. It goes back to leadership, because when we had the SARS, when we had Ebola, the world looked to the United States for leadership. And in this time, because of the policy of the past president, which was American only, we were not even engaged on the international scene. And then we began to point, or he began to point fingers at China. He began to point fingers at the World Health Organization. And so we were disengaged. And so the difference in terms of how we deal with this pandemic is that we had nobody at the helm steering the ship. Now recall that President Obama created a special entity in the White House to deal with pandemics. And the very first thing that 45 did was to disband it. Think about if that office would have been staffed and functioning and you had the people in place to begin to have a national policy, where we would be now and how we could have been leading the world. But not only did we not have a plan of action, the things that this 45 did prohibited even the states from taking a leadership role, because it was them versus us. And if you did not support his politics, you didn't get what you needed in the midst of this pandemic, whether it was support, whether it was additional ventilators or what have you. It was all based on blue and red. And so it really gave us a glaring picture of how dysfunctional this country was and how leadership matters. And so we did not have our usual place on the world stage because we didn't have a person in the White House that had any kind of vision, and it was not about anything but him. And in the latter days of his presidency, where the numbers were going astronomically high, not one time did he come to the world stage and say, this is what is happening, and here's how we're gonna mitigate it. When my book was published in the end of June, there were 118,000 known deaths. And we thought that was astronomical, but I said, it's gonna rise. And now we're approaching 500,000 people. It's incredible. And simple stuff like wearing a mask, and that became politicized in the last administration. We're not wearing a mask because it doesn't look good for a president of the United States to have a mask on. But where was one of the #1 spreaders of the illness? The White House. And that's something desperately wrong with that. So I'm happy that there's been a change in the national posture our plan to engage the world stage. But now Mr. Biden is in the White House and he has a hot plate in his hand. So now trying to mitigate this with all the other stuff that's going on, but at least we are seeing action. And the other thing that we're seeing now is true information. It's kind of interesting on the one hand and hypocritical on the other hand to watch different people who were on the task force during the past administration talk about why they didn't speak up and how relieved they are now that a new administration is involved. But there's something called medical, political, and personal ethics. And I don't care who is in charge, you have to have integrity in what you tell people, and the American people in this case. And so now to try to rewrite the story, and I'm talking about Dr. Brecht in particular, to talk about how she wanted to say things, and how she had this position, but it was not accepted. Now, you can't rewrite the story now. The fact of the matter is you stood on the world stage with this guy who called himself our 45th president and let him tell these non-truths, these lies, and these hoax theories, and you didn't say anything about it. So your hand has just as much blood on it than his.
Wow. Thank you for that, Dr. Silver. I know what you're describing is really the impact of leadership and policy and how that affects and affects people every single day. I think this is a good segue to talk about chapter 2 in your book titled The Leadership Challenge in America. Can you expand kind of on this concept?
Yeah. So what I was trying to share in that chapter was that on the world stage, the United States has always been a major player. And now we're in the midst of a major pandemic and we are missing in action. And because we did not have the proper leadership, it was a domino effect. It had an impact on the rollout of a national plan, which we never had in terms of trying to address the virus. But it also impacted the economy. It impacted relationships with foreign countries. We saw the tension already. We know what the tension is on the world stage between the Soviet Union, China, and the United States. And for the person who was in the White House at the time to try to make it a political statement as the China virus, it created a vacuum, if you would, in terms of trust and leadership. So what I was trying to show in that particular chapter was because we did not have proper leadership, that everything that could go wrong would go wrong and did go wrong. And the final analysis, it was going to be exhibited in the loss of lives across this country and across this world. This is a very aggressive virus, and it has no respective of color, gender, age, or anything. And for us not to have a bona fide plan of action that would be integrated with state and local governments is just amazing. And so then we saw, even at the state level, different governors in red states playing politics with the virus. They know that people were dying, but yet and still, because they didn't want to get on the wrong side of the then president, they went along with this foolishness. You look at Florida, for example, when the governor there, DeSantis, came out and said, "We don't have a problem in Florida." And he sat with stood with the vice president on national television and said they had it under control. And then we saw the numbers just spike. Same thing in the state of Georgia. Our governor has yet to put a policy together that mandates wearing face masks. It is crazy. And the opening of schools and the opening of restaurants, they are not really concerned with anything but the vote. How is this going to impact my reelection? And I think that's a sad commentary on the United States at this particular time.
It sounds like you're really talking about the vote and the impact of the vote on the virus and vice versa.
Well, I think if you look at what happened in the United States in this last election, I think it really was a mandate on what should be done about the virus. I think that because of the lack of leadership in terms of the coronavirus, that the American people did not want to see more of the same. And so while 45 was trying to use it as a political strategy to say, if I don't talk about it, maybe it won't be a factor.
Mhm.
But reasonable people were saying, we need leadership that's going to address this full face and head on. And so I do think that the end result of the election had a significant tie-in with people just being tired of that situation.
So I'm thinking, as you said, Dr. Silver, of the timing that you were writing this book between 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. You were also on these AABHE online webinars. And I remember back in April and May during the early part of the virus, when probably many people thought, oh, this will go away soon, or maybe by early summer. And so you were making, unfortunately, accurate projections about how this was going to impact schools, how this was going to impact higher education, how this was going to exacerbate the public health and health disparities that we were already seeing prior to the pandemic. So as an educational platform, what do you think are some lessons learned about the pandemic as it relates to administration? And then I want to talk about other groups.
Well, one of the things I can say, I want everybody to tell my wife this, that I was pretty smart on this issue, you know, because I predicted what would happen, about 10 or 15 things that would happen, and every single thing did happen. That was back in February, March when I made those predictions, and every single one of them did happen. And one of the things I talked about was when you think about when all this came, it was right during spring break and people were away from their campuses and students were getting notes, don't come back. Don't come back. But the campuses were not ready for it. I talked about the lack of preparation from a technology standpoint, but also from a human resource standpoint. You had people who were forced to go online that had never been teaching online before. And as a former administrator and provost, I was very, very, very careful about who I allowed to be in the distance space. Because if you didn't do what you're supposed to do when we were face to face, I don't know what you're going to do when we have no controls over that. And then you think about students who normally may not have had the equipment, but they came to the library to use the school's equipment. That wasn't accessible. But also, I was talking about the financial impact that it was going to have on institutions, because students are going to demand refund in terms of housing, refund and tuition, and all that happened. And institutions would have been completely devastated had not the stimulus package helped them. Some of the institutions that are saying they have a surplus budget this year, we balance our budget, it was only because of the resources that they got from the stimulus money. But for the stimulus money, you've seen a lot of institutions underwater. Now, two good things came out of that. One, many of our HBCUs in the first round, I was telling you that I thought the federal government was going to suspend payments on the capital loans in terms of interest and what have you. That did happen. Now in this next round, this last round, they forgave all that debt. So now you're going to see 25, 30, 40, $50 million going off the balance sheets of these institutions. And I'm hoping that they're going to do the right thing and manage those resources in a way that they don't find themselves in the same predicament that they find themselves in now. One of the lessons learned that I talked about is that seat time is not as golden as we thought it was. And I've always been a proponent that you don't have to sit in a seat 16 weeks to learn something. Some might need 20, 25 weeks, but some might need 5 weeks. So why can't we create a learning paradigm where once you have demonstrated the competency, you can move on? And I think in this pandemic, we've seen that. We've seen that different modules of teaching have come, and folk are making that work. But the other thing that I saw, which is a good lesson too, is how nimble the accreditation agencies can be if they need to be. And I just have to give a big shout out to Belle Willen, because she worked miracles for the schools and the Southern Association. She speeded up the process by which they got their approval to move offline. She made accommodations for them in real time in terms of the finances. There are several institutions that, but for the grace of God, but for the stimulus money and the open-minded of Belle Willen, they wouldn't have their doors open today. That's a fact. And so as we begin to look at this, one of the lessons learned is what I've been preaching all the time, is that I might have a different view of the world from a liberal perspective, but when it comes to money, I'm like my dad. You can't spend what you don't have.
Hmm.
And so as institutions, we can't begin to budget right up to the margin in terms of our projections. We have to budget conservatively in terms of maybe the last 3 or 4 years actuals, and always put money aside for things that you don't know are going to come, the contingency or the emergencies. Nobody knew this thing was going to come, and it wiped out budgets immediately. But it also had an impact on streamlining, because institutions had to furlough, they had to fire, they had to suspend, and some of these folk would never come back to work. All these things we predicted in February, and it did come to pass.
Dr. Fitzsilver, this makes me think of challenges, but also opportunities that you're describing in terms of what are some new learning modules, what are some new frameworks, what are kind of having a paradigm shift and really using innovation and creativity as our new lens as we move forward. What do you think are some lessons learned, particularly for students and parents?
Yeah, well, one of the things I said, and I say in the book, and I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes, I'm just talking about what I think. I think that the financial model for higher education in general and HBCUs in particular is outdated.
Hmm.
And because we're still tuition driven, it's just not going to work. We have to find additional revenue streams. We have to begin to look at how we can effectively use the online platform to make sure that we are engaging in spending and investing in people. And then we also have to begin to look at collaboration. This is something that people didn't want to talk about during the time, but we saw that several institutions, people have a lens on HBCUs, but they don't understand that other institutions who may not necessarily be HBCUs are having some of the same problems. So what I've been looking at is the number of institutions that have closed their doors during the pandemic. And I don't know of one HBCU that's closed their doors. Mm. But if you look at the number of other schools, other race schools that have closed their doors, it's over 100, okay? So one of the things I think we should do is begin to engage in ongoing, and it's a SACS requirement actually. Section 7.1 of the codes of SACS say that you should engage in ongoing systematic planning. And many of our institutions had not done that. So they did not have a framework to begin to look at these things. The other thing is institutions got to stop. Let me say it again. Institutions got to stop hiring on the family and friends plan and get the best qualified folk in there to do the work. You've got to have people who can move the institution forward, who have a creative vision, a creative lens, and the contacts to make sure that they have the resources to move these institutions forward. As we used to say all the time, this is not playtime, this is for real. Absolutely. So as a result of that, I need to impress upon these institutions that financial stability is a must. Intellectual capital is a must, and putting students first is a must. So now we have to begin to understand how can we serve students in the virtual world, because a lot of institutions are thinking that this pandemic is going to have an impact on their enrollment because students may opt to look at other models since we've been in this for 1 year, and the impact that the online education has had on the environment is worth talking about.
Dr. Silver, you have certainly given us all a call to action, no matter what form or facet we work in higher education or even outside of higher education. Where's the hope that you have for the future, for higher education, for faculty, students, administrators, parents, and just community members as a nation? Where's the hope? What do we need to be doing moving forward?
Well, the hope for me is in our young people. I watched this summer as protests came and the Black Lives Matter and the senseless killing of Black men and women. And I watched how young people came together to highlight and spotlight what was going on. And I can remember in the Atlanta protests, my neighbors were saying, you should stay home. You're a little too old to be out there marching. But I'm saying, now I'm going because it's based on what I believe. But what I was doing in the crowd was, and I remember that CNN seeing that that was pictured all over the world, and it was not the right information. But it characterized the protesters as being, out of control and what have you. And they were not out of control. They were contained in that one space for about 7 hours, and that was the strategy of the police, and that's what blew it up. But what I was doing in the midst of all that, I was trying to tell them, I understand your pain. I've lived your pain. But if all you're going to do is march, then it's not going to affect anything. What I want to do is go and register to vote and then turn out in November. And so one of the things I was advocating is before every one of our campaigns is have a voter registration project to make sure that everybody who was marching was already registered to vote and would go vote. And so I do think that some of that had an impact on outcomes here in the state of Georgia. But my hope really rests in the young people. It really is. But also it rests in what I know is the hearts of good people. And so I'm trying to stay upbeat in this pandemic by staying in contact with people who I know are like-minded and can think through these situations, and we can have a dialogue about where do we go on the backside of this project. I'm working on a project right now that I can't really talk about, but it has got me so pumped up because we're looking at it from a whole different lens and how we help HBCUs going forward. While I'm not at liberty to talk about it, what I'm simply saying, it gives me hope. It gives me hope. So it's not just about our HBCUs, it's about all of our institutions, because I have been on record as saying, I believe and I will support HBCUs until I die. But it's not just because it's an HBCU. That's not going to give you your ticket. It's not that you're predominantly Black or predominantly white, predominantly Hispanic. It's that you're predominantly good at what you say you're doing, which is teaching, learning, and serving students.
I love that you set that as the standard. We have quite a few questions in the chat, so if we have enough time to get to those. The first is, people want to learn a little bit more information about the 2022 Dubai trip. So what's the best way to get more information about that?
Okay, so it would be on the web, but all you have to do is contact me, jsilver6@comcast.net, jsilver6@comcast.net. It's a great trip plan. We're going to spend most of the time in Ethiopia. And one of the people who were supposed to be on the trip about a month ago, it was 10 o'clock at night, she called me, Miss Hattie Frederick. Dr. Silver, turn on your TV, turn on your TV. They got a special on Ethiopia. And she was so pumped up, so pumped up. And this will be the first time that we've traveled as an association to Ethiopia. We've been on the East Coast, but the last time we were on the East Coast of Africa, it was in Egypt. And that was about 12 years ago. And I know it was 12 years ago because my grandson is 12 years old as of last week, and he was in his mother's womb when we went there. So it's been 12 years.
Do you know the dates of the trip?
Yeah, it's going to be the second week in July, and it will be 15 days, including weekends. We try to schedule the trip around weekends too, to give people those 4 days. And so think about a day's travel going, day's travel coming back. So it'll be like 13 days on the ground. And what we do in those study tours is not, if you plan on going on a vacation, don't sign up. Okay, I'm just gonna be honest with you. It's called an International Professional Development Study Tour. So we are studying the relationships between these countries and other countries. And I saw a question that came in the chat that said, well, what is the relationship between the Africa and China? Well, one of the things that we were pushing, and people thought I was crazy, well, a lot of people think I'm crazy, but I was pushing the fact that the first inhabitants of China were Africans. And so I wanted the study group to study that and bring up the information and the data and the citation to prove what we were putting out there. And lo and behold, they did. So we looked at the DNA strands of the early Chinese inhabitants, and they were African. But when we went into the caves up into the Yangtze River and up to some of the mountainous areas, we went into those caves, and mirrors was on the wall. murals were on the wall, and they looked just like us. And they were thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. So my thinking was they wouldn't be drawing something that they didn't have the experience of. And so what we were able to do is to make that connection between the African people and their migration into China. We did the same thing in Australia, because when we went to Australia, people were thinking about their Aborigines, as they are called, but they call themselves the Aboriginals. And they're saying that everybody want to put us in the Asian Pacific realm. No, we came from Africa. And here's the proof. And so you begin to see a lot of the lifestyles of the Aboriginals that are tied to the teachings of Africa. The same thing, we went to Brazil. You know, when we went up to the Orishanas and saw what they were doing, it was just like we were in Accra or Cape Coast in Africa.
Well, Dr. Silver, you have certainly imparted so much wisdom and knowledge and input on what we all need to be doing moving forward, which was kind of a good segue to one of our guests said, since we now have a president whose leadership style and platform is opposite of the previous one, Dr. Silver, are you anticipating a volume 2 to your current book?
Wow. You're kind of posing a question that one of my associates with Silver & Associates just asked me last night. They were saying, given where we are you going to do a volume 2 on this? And if I do, it will not really be it will focus on the virus, but I think what it would focus on too is that now you have what we perceive as a well-meaning person with good intent, but now how the politics of the Senate and the House of Representatives will stall any good legislation or policies that might come out. Already, folk are saying that his stimulus bill is too ambitious, but people are out of work, people are hungry, people have jobs. And so if I did decide to write a volume 2, even the publisher asked me to do that too. As a matter of fact, he wanted to give me a 4-book contract, and I'm saying, no, I just do things one at a time. So let's get past this yet. So I'm not going to say no. I'm going to have to, all you guys listen to what I'm about to say now. I'm going to have to ask the boss. And if the boss says okay, then I might can spend that time doing it again.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Silver. So here is what the book looks like: Pandemic, Public Health, Race, and Class, the American Challenge. Anything that you'd like to share about proceeds to the book?
Yeah, I told AABHE that anybody that buys a book from this session, whether it's 1 or whether it's 200, all the proceeds will go to AABHE. I didn't write the book for money. I wrote the book because I was passionate about the topic. I was watching people suffer. As you know, a good friend of my family, Dr. John Marshall, I dedicated the book to him. He was a medical professional in South Georgia, a very staunch community person, civil rights advocate, but an absolute great doctor. And he served everybody who came. And he was serving the elderly who were cancer patients, but also who had the coronavirus. Well, he was infected by his patients, and having been living alone, probably trying to self-medicate didn't work. And so he was found in his home after people didn't see him in the community, and had to be airlifted to Savannah, Georgia. It stayed on a ventilator for over 90 days. And at the point in which I had the book published, which was in June, end of June, he had been in the hospital over 100 and some days. And as the book went to publish, he died. He died. So this is real. And so the book for me was, I was on a mission, one, to tell the truth, because one of the things we saw in the past administration is that truth had no place in that environment. And so now we see it being played out, and what we saw happen on January the 6th, people storming the Capitol because the lies that were told about the election, that Biden did not win, and so we're going to take the country over. these lies impact lives. And so the lies about the virus impacted lives, over 500,000 people dead. And the lies about the election has impacted something that I think is precious. It's not perfect, but it's precious, and that's democracy. And so it was not only fighting against what we saw in terms of the politics, but to me, it was an assault on democracy and the democratic process. And once we lose that in America, then we have nothing else, from my perspective.
Well, Dr. Silver, thank you. We certainly appreciate your time, your insight, and really the call to action of what we all need to be doing moving forward. I think you've also given us enough information that it sounds like we need to bring you back for another webinar, if you'll have us and be so gracious as you have been for the entire time that I've known you. So I'll definitely be working with the team to figure out how we can get you back and really just sharing your expertise.
Well, it's a pleasure. And to me, that's what we should be doing. We should be sharing information. We should be trying to make our space where we are better. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's about future generations. I remember making this comment to some friends when my first child was born. I said, you know, my life really kind of is put on hold now. And they said, what do you mean? I said, because it's not about me anymore. It's about making a life for my children and my family. And so then it comes full circle, because I had conversations with my children after they got grown and on their own. And I was telling them, all right, we've given you, we've done for you, and we're going to continue to love you, but it's not about you anymore. It's about Ms. Roz now. My job, now that we got you all up and out and got you ready for life, my job is to make sure that every day that Ms. Roz wakes up, that she got what she wants, she's happy, and that's where my energy is now. So we got to understand about making life better for someone else besides us. And I think we saw the failure of only being for yourself and being a narcissist in what we saw in the White House for 4 years. And so my hope is that we begin to do what my grandmother used to say, kill them with kindness. People are going to treat you bad. They're going to say bad things about you, but you know your name. It's not what they call you, it's what you answer to. And what I've seen is that if you fail to get down in the gutter with them, then you're going to survive. And there's one last thing I want to say that my grandmama told me that I really appreciate, and it's very apropos as we think about our students and our own professional development. As I look at some of the people who have signed up for this presentation, I see some seasoned professionals, I see some budding professionals. And it made me think about what my grandmother used to say when we thought that different ones of us were not achieving or didn't do something that somebody else did. What she said to me was, every flower in the garden does not bloom at the same time, but when they bloom, they're just as beautiful. And so at the time she told me that, it didn't make a whole lot of sense. I'm trying to understand what we're talking about, her flower garden, and I'm trying to get an answer to a question. But as I got older, that thing rocked me to the very soul. So we can't judge people about where they are, what they've done, because we don't know their conditions. But what we can do is watch them and help them develop and reach their full potential. And then when they decide to blossom, they're going to be just as beautiful as anybody else who's done the things that they're trying to do.
Awesome. Dr. Rovaris, I see that you're here, and welcome again. Any closing comments for our panel today and for our audience?
I want to first and foremost thank my friend and colleague, Shewanee Howard-Baptiste, for pinch hitting for me. Duty calls, as most of us who work at the university knows, I was called to a meeting that I was actually made chair of at the 12th hour. So anyway, that wrapped up. We were talking about diversity and inclusion and how we can make our campus, in this case, LSU, a better place for everyone. That's what AABHE has been about. Since its inception, we've been about trying to make sure that higher education is a good space for all of us, and that we're able to do the work that we do to enrich our students. Ultimately, it comes down to our students. And I want to thank my friend and mentor, he ain't that much older than me, Pete Silver, for his generosity today in sharing. Great work, and I hope you all will get copies of his book. And I also want to thank all the rest of the folks who helped put this together. There are a lot of people who work behind the scenes to make these webinars possible. We, back at the middle of last year, realized that we needed to connect with our members and our friends and future members through a mechanism that was bigger than our annual conference, which had to be canceled for COVID. And the webinars were born. And they've taken off, and they continue to soar. So I want to encourage you all. I want to invite you to our annual conference. I placed the link in the chat, and I want to encourage you all to stay encouraged throughout these trying times. In the meeting I was in earlier, one of our young students happens to be an African-American woman, said, you know, as a Black woman, people think I'm strong. That's all they want to know, is that I'm strong. And at the same time, they think of me as invisible or incapable of doing. We all are, and certainly our Black women are feeling that brunt. But we are indeed strong, and we are indeed capable, and we will continue to do great things. So on behalf of AABHE, I thank you all for joining us. I wish you all well, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Hey, Dereck, it's good to see you. And I did promise a gentleman, I was in a meeting last night with a guy, and I mentioned that this webinar was going on, and I mentioned, and he pulled it up and he saw your name, and he told me to make sure I tell you hello if he couldn't get on, and that was Roderick Miller.
Yes,
he said he knew you from the days he was in
Yeah.
Louisiana. He said,
Yeah.
please give Dereck my regards. So
Thank you, sir. That's a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, for all of our guests today, be looking out for an email so that we can ask you to complete a quick survey to provide us some feedback on ways that we can improve our time together. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and check out our conference again, March 14th through the 16th. So we look forward to seeing you all in a platform very soon.